Good evening, everyone. It is, let's see, it's Wednesday evening, just after 6:30 p.m. Wanted to get on here and do another video and look at the potential for severe weather here across North Texas, southern Oklahoma, really stretching all the way down the I-35 corridor from about Oklahoma City, really all the way down to the San Antonio area and over to Houston. The initial and probably the largest threat area is going to be this 3 out of 5 enhanced risk from the Storm Prediction Center as of today's update. Really centered over much of southern Oklahoma, southeastern Oklahoma, northeast Texas, including the Dallas Fort Worth metro. I think tomorrow, certainly a chance that you could see a couple isolated storms, maybe a tornado or two. Does look like probably the biggest threat is going to be some potential for large hail as well as some damaging winds. And so I want to kind of take a look at the environment, look at some of the forecast models, kind of look at what we can expect timing wise when that might occur, especially for the Dallas Fort Worth area. So let's jump into that again. Level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk from the Storm Prediction Center, centered kind of over that Dallas Fort Worth area for tomorrow, mainly an afternoon time frame. When we look at a couple of the different risks here, this is the tornado risk. Got a 5% here in Brown, really over much of east, northeast Texas, southern and southeastern Oklahoma, a little bit of Arkansas as well, including the Dallas Fort Worth area. So any storms that are kind of by themselves could certainly have a tornado risk. Could see a couple brief spin ups in a line that forms kind of towards sunset or overnight hours. So definitely could see a couple tornadoes. It doesn't look like a tornado outbreak or anything like that. But I think this is going to show really the main risk is for some pretty large hail, really 2 inches plus. So that'd be, getting up in the tennis ball range, and kind of, bigger than ping pong, tennis ball, maybe baseball, something like that. So really centered over the I-35 corridor here from south of Dallas Fort Worth up to about halfway up to Oklahoma City. So this is where those initial storms, probably more of a discrete mode, will form, and certainly those stronger ones could have the potential for some pretty large hail that could certainly do some damage. So keep an eye on for that. When we look at a couple, kind of just looking at the environment, this starts us off looking around kind of early evening, about 4 o'clock, kind of late afternoon, early evening. And I think a couple observations that we can see here. This is looking at kind of wind barbs there towards the surface and then the dew points, so that moisture quality that's in the atmosphere. Right here, we can kind of notice this dividing line here. This is a cold front that's going to be pushing in from the south or from the north and from the west, pushing off to the south. So we've got the cold front here, and then this is kind of a dry line setting up here. We've got dew points in the 30s, almost 40 out here. Just to the east, 60, 64, kind of mid 60s here. So this is called a dry line here, where you see a pretty stark difference between the moisture content in the air. And so when you get this little area between the cold front and the dry line, we call this kind of the triple point, in that you kind of have the warm moist air here, the dry line here, cold front here. So I think the biggest threat is probably going to be as this cold front and dry line push kind of off to the southeast. This triple point area is going to ignite storms, probably in that 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock time frame. And then these storms will kind of fire along the cold front, some along the dry line, and push kind of off to the southeast here as we go through the evening and then the overnight hours. So I think that's kind of the main kind of trigger point for storms tomorrow. We have ample moisture. It's going to arrive a little bit late, I think just in time, but not overly saturated, not a huge amount of moisture, which might actually keep some of the storms and at least the tornado threat at bay some, but certainly enough to see some severe weather. When we look at what the instability is going to look like in the atmosphere, could we see severe weather? Certainly, when we look at kind of that surface-based instability at 4 o'clock, we can see some of these higher values, 2,000, 2,500 joules per kilogram, even some of these dark blue. This is more than enough for severe weather. Again, kind of around that southern Oklahoma I-35 corridor, a little bit east, probably where we see some of the storms fire, and then along the dry line down here in North Texas as well. Looks like we could see some storms fire there. So plenty of instability in the atmosphere here. Kind of another parameter I like to use is the energy helicity index. Kind of gives us that crossover between moisture and instability along with some of that shear. So it kind of takes several of those ingredients together, and we can see a couple kind of bullseyes here, kind of southeast Oklahoma, another along the Red River right over I-35 here, and even stretching into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So all of the ingredients are there for severe weather. Let's look at a couple kind of the simulated radar and what that's looking at. Again, this would be about 4 o'clock Central Time. We can see a couple initial storms. Pretty strong storm here, kind of southeast Oklahoma, east of I-35, south of the I-40 corridor. Then a couple others that are popping up kind of right around that triple point dry line here along the Red River, right along I-35. As we move forward in time, we can see a couple more storms are kind of popping up towards the North Texas area. This would be Denton County right here. Again, 22Z, that's going to be 5 p.m. Still have these storms in southeast Oklahoma, kind of Durant, Atoka area. And as you'll see as we move forward, these storms kind of push off to the east, kind of to the south. Then they start to kind of form a little bit of a line here. Still a couple kind of individual cells that we can see, but we do start to kind of line out here over the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so I think these initial storms here along that 4 or 5 o'clock hour, when we've got some initial isolated storms, probably the bigger hail threats would be in any of these. Once we start to get to more of this line segment right here, probably more of a damaging wind threat. Certainly could see some isolated larger hail, but typically you see the hail threat dissipate once that line really starts to kind of form. And then as we progress further to kind of sunset into the overnight, we see this big line kind of set up and then move off to the southeast with time. So definitely could see some of those isolated big time hailers there early, followed by more of a damaging wind threat. And definitely looks like the Dallas-Fort Worth area will be kind of under the gun, kind of that probably 5 o'clock to 7 p.m. time frame would be my guess. Last thing I wanted to look at is just a model sounding here and look at kind of the environment. We do this from time to time, and so what we always look at is what's the dew point and temperature. So we got 64 degree dew point here in green, 71 degree temperature. We don't have any type of a capping inversion here. This area between the dashed white line and the red line, that's the instability, the cape, kind of that storm juice that the storms have. We've got pretty strong winds here just above the surface, kind of out of the southwest, more of westerly with height. We don't really have that southerly southeasterly component at the surface, so maybe a little bit less of a tornado threat here. But we can see certainly if you look at the storm slinky, the storm is going to be turning and rotating with height. And then when we look here at the hodograph, we see that there's pretty good turning here in these lowest levels. Typically when you see some decent turning, but nothing like extreme, like looking like this, and then you see some of this more kind of straight-lined wind speeds, but certainly pretty strong winds higher up. Typically, this is kind of what you would look for a hail sounding. And so we've got a little bit of turning here in the low levels, but nothing extreme. And then we've got winds that kind of push out and away faster speeds as it moves to the right. That's going to be kind of what you typically see for some pretty significant hail. And when we look at this analog here, we can see some examples of supercells in the past that had a similar environment, and a lot of significant hail matches here. So this looks at historical data to say, okay, if we look at this environment and these ingredients, what types of storms did we see? And we can see that there's pretty good amount of different hail. And again, this is showing the size of hail, all the way from 2.5 inches up to, 4 inches. I don't know that we're going to see 4 inches, but could we see, 2.5 inches, which would be, tennis ball, baseball? I think that certainly could be in the cards for tomorrow. So, again, just wanted to take a look at this. Again, looking at kind of the simulated radar, I would say kind of this 6 p.m. time frame is probably when Dallas-Fort Worth is going to see those storms. So definitely stay weather aware. Anything that's loose, I'd probably bring inside. You definitely watch out with cars with potential hail damage, and hopefully we'll avoid something. But sometimes these kind of early season March, April storm systems, sometimes we can get some pretty big hailers that impact the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So again, everybody stay safe, kind of stay weather aware tomorrow. Stay tuned for watches, warnings, follow the National Weather Service, and I'll probably try to get out there and see if I can live stream if I get on a good storm here tomorrow. So everyone have a good Wednesday evening, and thanks for watching.